Coming to DARPA is like grabbing the nose cone of a rocket and holding on for dear life.
DARPA is a place where if you don't invent the internet, you only get a B.
A DARPA program manager quite literally invents tomorrow.
Coming to work every day and being humbled by that.
DARPA is not one person or one place. It's a collection of people that are excited about moving technology forward.
Hello, and welcome to Voices from DARPA. I'm your host, Tom Shortridge. Today, we're speaking with Dr. Whitney Mason. If that name sounds familiar to longtime listeners, it's because we've already chatted with her back in episode 42, The Infrared Visionary, where we took a deep dive into her portfolio as a program manager. Since that time, though, she's held other positions with the agency, first as the Deputy Director in the Strategic Technology Office, and now as the Director of the Microsystems Technology Office. And in fact, even since we recorded this interview, she's also now been named the Acting Deputy Director of the agency. Whitney, thanks for joining us again. If listeners want your full background, I encourage them to go back to your previous episode. But just as a quick table setter, why did you come to DARPA?
Oh, gosh, this is probably a really bad answer because I was bored. I worked at a service lab for 17 years, and I had various different positions when I was there, changed about every 3 or 4 years, but reached a point where, I had done everything that I could for them, and they had kind of given everything that they could to me, and I was kind of bored. And so Jay Lewis from DARPA called and said, if you ever thought of coming to DARPA, and I hadn't. Mm-hmm. But then I started thinking about all the things that I had wanted to do in my job that my boss said was too risky. And I thought, wow, DARPA is a place that embraces risk, right? That is totally the place to go. So I came, and 7 years later, here I am.
Here you are as the director of MTO, the office where you were previously a PM. Now, one of the things I love about DARPA is how, even though the mission of the agency never changes, that's creating technological surprise for national security, how that's done is constantly being reevaluated and reshaped by the flow of people who come through as agency director, as program managers, as office directors, and their visions of how to accomplish that mission. What is sort of your vision for MTO as an office?
Some people sometimes have referred to the Microsystems Technology Office as the Microelectronics Technology Office. And we have the capability to be so much more than that. We are the tide that raises all ships. The technology that we work on can be applicable to batteries, to quantum sensors, to quantum computing, to organic circuits, to all of these different capabilities that can transform everything. And because MTO PMs and the MTO office gets deep into that technology that can drive these transformations in different ways, that means that we can expand our world beyond just building little computer chips or little communication chips, but expand that into microsystems that move things into different spaces. What I very firmly believe is that disruption occurs when you create new things, not just improvements along a current path. We want to revolutionize the world, not just provide evolutionary capability. I'm really big on not having replacement technology. I have a silicon transistor, and now I have an organic transistor. What is the implications of that organic transistor? If it's nothing, I just have an organic transistor, then that's not actually interesting. What's interesting is if you say, well, I have an organic transistor, and this can move into other directions and provide other capability that we don't have now. That is where the space gets really interesting. So MTO right now wants to broaden our perspective across a wide variety. People ask me, what makes a good MTO program? A good MTO program is one that gets down to that foundational capability, but disrupts things along any path that is appropriate for the Department of Defense.
Okay, I want to pull on this thread a little more. Organic transistors. What does that mean, first of all, and what are the kinds of other directions you can go with those?
I very firmly believe that really interesting things happen at the intersections of two different technologies. And one of the intersections that seems really ripe for investment right now is the intersection between organic and inorganic materials. A lot of people talk about bioelectronics. I very deliberately don't say that because invariably when I say bioelectronics to somebody, they tell me about electronics for bio purposes. And of course, DARPA has made significant investments over the years in developing sensors, for example, for health monitoring, and that has been very impactful. But I want to step back from that and think about how biology can help in this electronics world. How can I use biology to either solve fundamental problems that I have in the microelectronic space, or how I can use biology as a disruptor to the microelectronic space? And I'll give a couple examples. Number one, can I inject biology into the microelectronics process to speed up material synthesis, for example? Can I use that as a scaffold upon which I can grow perfect material instead of spending years turning knobs to improve the material capability? Can I put biology into the system as a passivator, right, or as a self-healing sort of capability, so that I can cure defects when they're made in the materials, or use them, when something breaks in the electronics when they're out in use, to come in and heal the electronics? Can I use them also as vectors to think about recycling, replacement, reuse? Can I use biology and my electronics to think about reducing, reusing, recycling? Is there some mechanism by which I can reclaim the materials because I have biology in them so that I can repurpose that material? And then can I use biology as a capability? Biocomputing is an obvious one that comes to mind. Again, right, I'm not into replacement capability. If the biological computer does the same thing as the current computers, that's not necessarily interesting. But there's research that says that biology can do interesting mathematical computations that current computing capability cannot. Can I use biological compute to fill a need that we have in, for example, developing energetics or something like that, where a critical understanding of the biology is needed and we need to move into biology as the compute mechanisms? This is a field that I think is out there in the research community, but it's really at its infancy, which I think makes it a super exciting time to come and try it out and see if it works. That's why DARPA is the place to take this on, right? It's okay to be wrong if what you do creates the next revolution, even though your hypothesis was not strictly correct. The learning that you do here is going to propel research into a direction where things are really going to matter.
I want to go back just a little bit. When you first mentioned organic computing, you also mentioned, I think, quantum computing. I had the pleasure to interview Joe Altepeter for a previous episode of this show when he was a PM in the Defense Sciences Office. Now he's a PM in MTO. That episode started to help me wrap my head a little bit around quantum. But when you're talking about quantum in the scope of MTO, are we talking about building quantum chips, quantum systems, or are we talking about it like the organics, where you're looking for those differentiating or non-replacement type use cases? What is MTO's perspective on quantum?
The Defense Science Office has made a huge investment into quantum science and an understanding of the fundamental physics calculations around that. But when it comes time to start making something real and actually build something, Microsystems Technology Office is the place to be. We're not sure, honestly, if quantum computing is going to be a thing. The community has a lot of hype and excitement around this. And, to some extent, we view ourselves as the smart buyer that says, does this make sense? And are we ready to go? One of the program managers in Microsystems Technology Office has a program where he has explored whether or not a utility-scale quantum computer can be useful, which we're not sure it will be. And if such a thing were found where quantum computing would be meaningful, could you actually build a quantum computer? Now, Joe says there's a small chance. And so it's time to explore. Again, right, it's time to take the risk and say, does this make sense? And will this actually work? If it doesn't work, the reality is we've done a great service to the community by saying, you know what, quantum computers are not, in fact, ready yet. The hype is overblown, but we have good, solid, rigorous, impressive team of people that are exploring whether or not this makes sense And if it does, it can be transformative in this country to be able to have quantum computing. We have the risk tolerance at DARPA to say maybe it's going to work and we should look at that. And we have the really smart and amazing people that are able to drive that program in the appropriate way to get the answer.
And those people are constantly coming and going here at DARPA. Everyone's got expiration dates on their badges. Then they're either leaving the agency or they're switching roles, as you've done. As you're going through that process and hiring program managers to keep those fresh ideas coming through, what are you looking for?
We hire on ideas here. You can be brilliant and contribute to the world in many ways, but you have to have a transformative idea to come to DARPA. And I think the biggest criteria that you have to have as a program manager is to be okay with being uncomfortable. What we want program managers to do is to push ideas to the brink of disbelief, right? Not exactly defy the laws of physics, but come really close. Have that pit in your stomach when you say, this is the right thing to do. One of my favorite interactions with a program manager was he came in with an idea, and it was cool, and it would have been important. But the solution was just pretty straightforward. Once you've figured out how to do something, right, and the solution is solvable, that's really a place for somebody else to take this on. So I kept saying, what if we tried to do this? And what if we tried to do this? And what if we tried to do this? Till his face got really unhappy. And he said, I don't know if I can do that. And I said, is it physically possible? And he said, yeah. And I said, then that's what we're going to go do. And that has become the Amy program. It's kind of like a replicator in Star Trek. And I think it's going to transform everything. That's where we want program managers to get, to a place where they're uncomfortable, and yet the idea is so amazing that we can't not do it. So what makes a particularly good DARPA MTO PM is somebody that is deep into the technology, but broad enough to understand how things will translate across a world of technology, not just solve a particular technology problem, but a big technology problem that can transform other industries. And in fact, the most exciting time is when the technology will enable something that you've never even thought of.
All right, so that's a little bit about what it takes to be a PM. I've heard you speak before about what it takes to make these new disruptive microsystems, like literally the materials.
New materials have formed the foundation of nearly every revolution in history. There's a reason it's called the Iron Age and the Bronze Age. The Industrial Revolution, right, changed our entire economy because we started moving into materials and manufacturing. Silicon, which is the basis for almost everything that we have, 60, 70 years ago was a new material that required research. I'm an imaging scientist by profession. Moving into new materials allows soldiers to be able to see at night. Moving into new materials, wide bandgap and ultra wide bandgap provide better comms, provide better thermal management. New materials have formed the foundation for new technical disruption. And that, of course, equates to economic disruption, right? Economic security is national security, and the foundation of materials as new products, new capability is what drives our economy. Now, we're not interested in discovering new materials. If you look at the literature, there are many artificial intelligence-driven examples of thousands of new materials that exist. It's not enough to come up with a new material. You have to work through the synthesis of those materials, the tools to develop those materials. How do you process that material? How do you turn it into real devices? How do you work on the yield of those materials? MTO is not interested in just understanding those materials. We want to drive the materials to a place where we actually have products that go and disrupt the capability that we have from all sorts of functions. MTO is interested in material scientists and materials research for purposes, right? And so we don't want to dictate the material of choice. We're looking for people with ideas in how to take emerging materials and how to use them in different ways. Disruption occurs when you create something new, some new capability. how do we tie the material science into that disruptive capability? And so we're looking for material scientists who can come in with a broad understanding, not just of the materials, but also of the potential impact that those materials can be, and an understanding of how you would drive from that ideation, that synthesis, all the way to the product in the field. And that's one of the things that differentiates the efforts that we have going on in manufacturing. We currently have a program called the Next Gen Microelectronics Manufacturing Program. It's about advanced packaging, but it's about advanced packaging from a new and novel and way advanced perspective. A lot of people, when they talk about heterogeneous packaging, what they mean is putting logic and memory together. Or they mean taking silicon from one foundry and silicon from another foundry and integrating that together, or maybe even integrating that together in a 3D stack. But what DARPA is driving is pulling in best-of-breed materials, gallium arsenide, gallium nitride, diamond, new materials that can advance the capability significantly. We want to leap ahead into those best-of-breed materials that open up new capabilities for the future. One of the things that I think is super important is the speed of disruption. I heard a great talk the other day about a new material, and it was very interesting, was very technically sound. It seemed to open new capabilities. I was getting excited. And at the end of the talk, the professor said, of course, it'll be 20 years before this is available. That just takes too long. We need to get into a cycle of moving from ideation to products and disruption at a much faster scale. So we want to take a look at the manufacturing environment and look to manufacturing science to see if there are ways that we can move from new material to new product to new manufacturing ecosystem to a yield of 99% in a much more aggressive fashion than the 10, 20, 30 years it takes now to go from an idea in somebody's head to an actual product in your pocket, a product on a tank. I think that that is important for us from a Department of Defense perspective, but I think it's also important for us at a national level. From a national economy perspective, we need to be the first country to be making these technical disruptions. And it's not enough to just have good science, because many, many, many countries have good science. We need to be the first to market, the first to be able to implement that science in a real way and provide value to the citizens and the Department of Defense, but also value for our economy.
How do you find that balance between commercial and government, and how do you see DARPA and the DoD fitting into that ecosystem?
One of the topics that I have just played over in my mind for the last 25 years is how do we provide differentiating capability on top of commercial capability? I've always worked for the Department of Defense. I worked for the Army, and now I'm currently at DARPA. And what drives me is how do I make sure that the American soldier is the most safe, secure person as he or she goes out to fight for us. But you have to do it at scale, and you have to do it at an affordable cost. So we're always locked into this place where what the DoD wants is low volume, high mix kind of capability, whereas the commercial world is high volume and low mix, right? They build the same thing over and over and over again, which means they don't have to spend any non-recurring cost, and they have a very stable market and a very stable process. How can the DoD take advantage of that and yet remain differentiated compared to the rest of the world? So I have a concept that I've called dual use by design. And what I mean by that is how can I drive differentiating capability for the Department of Defense on top of commercial capability? A couple avenues where we're thinking that this makes sense is in tool development. So can I build new tools that are able to take commercial products and build something on top of them? A little security capability, a little performance enhancer that, acknowledge that adds some cost, but it's not brand new, right, from a ground up perspective, and so it costs us all that money to do. The advantage here, I think, is that the Department of Defense gets things at a reasonable cost. And let's face it, the Department of Defense functions on taxpayer dollars just like everything else does. But it also helps our economy, right? Because it's actually assisting in our research and our drive for advanced technologies. It helps the commercial world keep up to date and move their technology forward as well. So I see this as a virtuous cycle where the commercial world is enhanced and the techno-economic advances are maintained in the United States, but also that the Department of Defense gets some additional capability on top of that that allows us to continue to be the best military in the world.
We're coming up on the end of our time here, but before I let you go, kind of bring it back to where we started. You said you came to DARPA because you were bored. Do you have any thoughts or advice for someone out there right now who might be bored or is looking for something new?
The reason that DARPA is the very best place in the entire world to work is because you have about 1,000 people cheering for you and backing you up. The DARPA director works for the program manager. The office director works for the program manager. Security works for the program manager. IT, contracting, everybody is trying to make the program manager wildly successful because the program manager is the person that actually works for a living, right? It's the program manager that comes up with these disruptive ideas that transform the world. I don't know of any place in the world that's like that. If any of this sounds super exciting and you are ready to come make a difference in DARPA Microsystems Technology Office, we would love to have you join us.
And we will have links to resources and related information in the show notes. Thanks once again to Whitney Mason for joining us on Voices from DARPA. And as always, thank you for listening.